Once you've got your discrepancies down to files that are not being generated, it's a lot easier to classify them into categories. So we have to look at each one. There are going to be a few basic categories here. There are going to be, remember first of all that there are some that belong in all the code, and if they belong in all the code, then you have to change the template. And there are some that do not belong in all the code, and you have to move them to custom, to a custom location, or to generate something new that has custom locations within them. So if it's a whole file, then that's going to be something that you just, if the whole file is for the sake of business logic, then it has to be put into a custom directory. And if not, then you're probably going to have to generate something that has it. So let's look through at these. First of all, IDEA is used by WebStorm. That is simply not relevant at all. So we don't have to do anything anywhere except remove it from our searches. So let's go to this and let's put in an exclusion for IDEA. Okay, that was fun. Now lib and nice output and Oaklift manifest.json, where did those come from? Those are actually generated by Oaklift when periodically people update their commands. We want to create the same thing in ours. So what are lib, nice output, and Oaklift manifest.json? Those are files that are generated by Oaklift when you update your README and all that. There's times when it happens. So in order to deal with those are going to have to be ignored by our config. So this is a case where, do they belong in all the code? Yes, in fact they do. So we have to change our template for it. How do you change the template in a case where it's not something that you're going to generate, but it's something that's going to be generated on the side of the code base? Well, that you have to put into what's called the ignored section. The ignore section, let's see, here's an ignore section. It actually comes custom made for this case, but you can apply the same idea to anything that you want by putting an ignore for whatever files that you want to, ignore. What's going to happen is the version that is particular code base has is what it's going to stay with, and you're not going to update it at all. And you're not going to pay any attention to it. Okay, so it's not going to show up as a discrepancy when people test their code in NSFlip. You might be wondering, why do you need to ignore something? The answer is that NSFlip comes with a testing capability. Before you regenerate code, you test for it, and it has to be able to pass that test before you can start regenerating. Otherwise, you're going to lose your custom changes. So it's very important that you do have your ignore up to date. So what I want to do also, though, for our purposes, is because diff doesn't know about the ignoring that goes on in NSFlip, it's simply going and comparing things. So what I want to do here is create for each one of these so that I don't have to keep looking at that, because you could just ignore them yourself, but I prefer to keep this as simple as possible. By the way, as I said before, JSON and JSON lock are also ignored. JSON is a little more complicated, but it's basically not going to generate a problem for us in practice with NSFlip when we do testing. Basically, anything that gets ignored ends up going in as an exclusion as well. We see a lot of things inside of source now. A couple things inside of test. So we have to look at each thing. What is ask and commands pull and push and execute commands? So there's a few categories here. Commands are the pull and push commands that were created in our sample trajectory. And these are the test files that were created for them. Those are going to be of the static type. Why? Because we don't know how many commands there are going to be, but we know that there will be some, and they'll vary from each one to the next. We know it's a set number, so this is static. So we're going to have to deal with those as static. Then there's ask, execute command, get projects, pull code, push code types. What are these? You can either tell by inspection, or if you just know that these are the business logic files for the particular trajectory that we've developed. So going back to our standard chart here, we see that these are things that are only on the sample side, and do they belong in all the code? No, they do not. So we should move them to custom. Now, if it's an entire file, and if it's not static or dynamic or standard, then where does it go? Well, it's going to end up going to the custom directory. What we need to do is, notice these are all in the source directory. Let's look inside that directory right now. You see here that we have an empty custom directory. We also have a lot of files. Okay, so all of these can just go into there. Of course, you have to refactor. I'm using an editor that it does allow for refactoring. It looks like it refactored them in. And if you want, we could test and see and make sure that it's still working, but that's the idea. idea now. Let's run this again. This is regenerating. So we're seeing them and they are all on the side of here. The problem is that we did not we should have put an exclude into here, but we don't have to. In fact, it'd be better for us not to. Instead of doing that, let's keep, better that we did not, because then we know what we have to do. Notice that we have a lot of stuff that's on the sample side for custom. Why don't we copy back custom from sample back into code? Remember that at the end of the day, we want them to be identical. So when we move something into a custom field of one, we should really do it into the other one too. So what I want to do is copy everything that we just moved over. What are we left with? Notice that again, we've got some changes coming in now in meta. Whenever we have changes in meta, we should copy into the other direction. So let's take care of that. Copy file sample. And if your mind thinks like mine, you're probably thinking like, couldn't we automate a lot of this? And we really could. Let's do a diff. Okay, the README is simply different. Index shouldn't have been moved over. That's why we're getting a new edit file. We'll take care of that here inside the editor. So let's go into custom index, pull that out. We might as well just pull that out of, it says that it does exist. There seems to be a problem with the indexing or something in my editor. We're going to do another diff. Yeah, in fact, source custom index does not belong there, does it? What I want to do is, having moved that file back, now we are to a point where the only difference is in the sample readme MD. What I want to do right now is, we're not going to be able to get this to be the same until we have the commands the same. So in the next video, we're going to deal with our creating our static tools, and then we'll be in a position to do something about the README as well.